Good evening. There are crises that are coming so close together today that it's difficult to get our moorings, even to know what to pay attention to. But I want to talk about something much deeper that's happening, and that is, it's the U.S. empire collapsing. Yay. That's the truth of it. That is the truth of it. Now, on Tuesday, President Trump threatened the Democratic People's Republic of Korea with fire and fury like the world has never seen. And he made it clear he was talking about a preemptive nuclear strike. And he raised the stakes on it again today, reiterated the threats. But on a quieter level, U.S. nuclear threats on Korea are an everyday event. Every day, and especially in August. And this is what People's Korea is responding to. In August is when the U.S. and South Korean militaries hold the world's largest annual military exercise, and they target North Korea again and again with nuclear weapons and overflights and submarines and aircraft carriers and huge troop deployments. And all the attention in the media is focused on a couple of test missiles where North Korea is saying, People's Korea is saying, don't you dare. We're going to defend ourselves. But the threats are coming entirely, overwhelmingly from U.S. imperialism. Now, People's Korea had previously offered again and again, to suspend its nuclear development if the U.S. and South Korea suspend their annual war games. What could be easier? And it's in the past that the U.S. has rejected the offer. They claim that their nuclear exercises are, quote, legal. But North Korea's nuclear development is not. That's bourgeois law, right? That's international law at its clearest. Now, the DPRK has refused to cringe or cower, and they've refused to disarm because they know what happened when Iraq and Libya did, forced by U.S. threats. And they issued a statement, said the time of dictating orders by brandishing U.S. military might has gone. If those businessmen in power in the U.S. thought of intimidating us by any military or sanctions threat, as the Obama administration used to do and failed, they will find such threats are useless. And this is why it's really essential for the entire political movement to stand up and demand the U.S. sign the peace treaty, ending the war from 1950 to 53. And get the troops out, all the troops out, so the Korean people can defend and determine their own destiny. And just for everyone here to know, very important demonstration that our Korean friends have asked us to participate in Monday, noon, in front of the UN, 43rd Street and First Avenue. It's just 1 hour, but noon on Monday. Now, let's look a little further. U.S. threatened an attempted coup and strangulation sanctions, the worst yet, if Venezuela went ahead with an election. Disgusting. A constituent assembly, a really representative body of all the sectors in society. And Venezuela dared to go ahead. They proclaimed, we will not be intimidated. Let's look at Syria. They demanded for 6 years, the U.S. demanded, for 6 years that the entire government of Syria must resign, and a government hand-packed by the imperialists should come to power. And to back it up, the U.S. armed tens of thousands of the most reactionary forces. They imposed 14 years of sanctions. The sanctions have been going on since actually the invasion of Iraq, 2003. Syria has defended itself. Then in 2014, 4 years in, the U.S. and 15 NATO and Gulf countries began bombing Syria nonstop, claiming they were targeting ISIS. The result was a third of the population displaced, refugees. Syria called for assistance from Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, and Lebanon responded because they knew if Syria fell, they were next. Amazingly, Syria has survived. Now, Syria or Venezuela or People's Korea are not safe, but they have fiercely resisted and survived. There's lessons here really from the Palestinian resistance. It has so much to teach about being steadfast, about staying on course. Now, U.S. imperialism has the capacity in one launch to end life on Earth. That's true. And they threaten that all the time. They threaten a preemptive strike, first strike, especially against countries that have absolutely no defense capacity whatsoever. But short of that nuclear strike, more and more they're finding they have very little capacity to defeat even the poorest country in the longest war in U.S. history, Afghanistan. Now, just think about that for a minute. There's no base, no U.S. base today in Afghanistan that's safe. Even no prison compound from a prison break. The very drones that strike without warning peoples and movements around the world, and there are hundreds and hundreds of drone strikes, those drones are becoming their undoing. Because while they create mass hatred, any small off-the-shelf drone camera and a laptop can map the inside of any U.S. base. And that's what's going on. And the troop movements. Yep. And this is their problem in Afghanistan. And they know it everywhere in the world. They bring nothing to win the hearts and minds, no improvement in life, only weapons that create mass hatred and burning resistance. And it takes all forms. So that's what's most important for us to always understand, absorb, think about the power of resistance and the limits of their power. Now, as Nate was saying, we have a delegation from several cities going tomorrow to Charlottesville, Virginia, in a confrontation with a very dangerous bloc of white supremacist, KKK, Nazi dregs who've descended on Charlottesville in hundreds in an effort of mass terror. That's really what they're saying. They want to use mass terror, claim they're coming armed and so on. And it's in response to a city council vote to take down racist Confederate statues. They were encouraged, emboldened by the Trump climate. They won't be unopposed. There are thousands, really, thousands who are turning out to stop them. And this includes from church groups and unions and pacifists to Antifa forces to our own Workers' Wall Party contingents from 5 cities. So this is a kind of lesson also in resistance. The number of groups that are just determined they will not rally and are standing up. They're the ones who called this confrontation. Now, the people of the world today are not just facing Trump. What they're facing, U.S. imperialism needs war, needs militarism. It's their lifeblood. Right. So where is it all going? We've said for years this is a sign of the decline and the decay of the empire, right? They have no answers to any of the enormous problems facing them, from the MTA and the subways to the environment, to the health, to the hospitals, to the housing. No solution to any problem, to even keeping industries running. But now, and I want to talk about a report from the top ranks of the Pentagon, there's resounding agreement. This is pretty shocking. There's a study by the U.S. Department of Defense. It's called At Our Own Peril. And it's a product of a year-long U.S. Army War College research effort. And it's a combined report with the participation of military think tanks. They list all the different groups, Joint Chiefs of Staff, all the different specialties. And the report says there's a fundamental change going on that can only be ignored at our own peril. Now, this article caught my attention because there was an alternate article headlined, Pentagon Studies Declares U.S. Empire is Collapsing. I thought, I want to read that. So here's some direct quotes from the Pentagon report. The international order established by the U.S. after World War II is collapsing. Another place says unraveling. Another, it talks about it fraying. It says in decline. I mean, the words, this isn't us, this is a U.S., Army War College. The authority of governments that are part of the international order is crumbling. Global events are happening faster than the Department of Defense can handle. We're being outpaced by world events. The global order that the U.S. built for the past 7 decades is under enormous stress. Quote, says the U.S. can no longer count on its unassailable position of dominance, of preeminence, nor can it rely on its dominance that it enjoyed for 20-plus years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. They say the U.S. is entering, or is in the midst, of what they call a post-primacy environment. And then a little later it says post-U.S. primacy environment.
Yeah, really.
They describe they've lost their status of preeminence. We're now in an environment of persistent disruptive change.
Good.
They call it a post-primacy era. So this is all a U.S. Army War report. It says one of the biggest threats they faced is the uncontrolled spread of information. And again, these are quotes, that they can no longer rely on secrecy and operational security. Wide, uncontrolled access to technology that most now take for granted is rapidly undermining prior advantages of discrete, secret, or covert intentions, actions, or operations. And then another, in the end, senior defense leaders should assume that all defense-related activity, from minor tactical movements to major military operations, would occur in the open from this point forward. Think of those little drones in Afghanistan, or in the hands of Hezbollah in Lebanon. This report also describes the generalized disintegration of traditional authority structures, fueled by an accelerated hyperconnectivity and the obvious decay and potential failure of the post-Cold War status quo. These are the big minds looking at the world and the problems they face. It's a major problem. The people of the world can now talk to each other. And the report goes on listing a number of facts that must be faced. The most dangerous is the release of facts that challenge legitimacy. They're talking about leaks like Chelsea Manning and Snowden that exposed highly classified facts. It's true, they did. The videos, the images. So they describe a problem that's pretty accurate. And we are cheering. But U.S. Army War College is not a defeatist institution.
That's right.
So they're giving out this report as a wake-up call, and it's making the rounds to influence the think tanks and the policymakers and the talking heads and the corporate media. And what's the Army War College really saying? Who are they talking to? That's what we have to think. They're not talking to us. They're talking to every millionaire in the Senate. It's called the Millionaires Club for a reason, right? In Congress and their funders. They're talking to every billionaire media CEO. They're talking to the biggest banks and oil and gas and military corporations. And they're telling them, your world is coming to an end unless you get totally behind us and we really take the gloves off. Because then they go into their proposals. Their solution is more the same of what they already know has not worked. Now, Albert Einstein said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and again and expecting a different result. Well, this is an institution. It's not an individual. It's an institution that is incapable of doing anything but what it is doing. So their proposals are a loss of primacy means expanding the military as the only option. Invest in more surveillance. Improve propaganda. A larger and wider, more flexible U.S. military. The weaponization of information and disinformation. Another quote is that the U.S. and its partners must have unimpeded access to air, sea, space, and cyberspace. Why? Because the U.S. empire must maintain its global access to resources. So anything that undermines overwhelming military might is now described as a threat that deserves to be attacked. More military, more threats, trillions more in military expenditures, and it's further bankrupting the entire system, which is already hollowed out in ways that we realize today increasingly. As I said, the system needs war, and it needs war to sustain its empire, and it needs war to keep its system afloat. And I think Congress and the media have gotten the message. Because I want to describe, 2 weeks ago, the U.S. Congress passed by overwhelming vote harsh, economically disruptive sanctions on Russia, Iran, and Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Every Democrat, everyone, voted for the sanctions. Republicans too. The vote was all but unanimous, 419 to 3. In the Senate, the vote was 98 to 2. That's an amazing consensus. But these U.S. sanctions, and this is the U.S. corporate problem, they were met with anger, even from traditional U.S. allies, because suddenly they feel the impact. Their industries and energy supplies are threatened by a cutoff of their sources of energy, which happen to be Russia and Iran. Iran is actually back now to full capacity of what it was before the sanctions that were imposed. The sanctions are a real financial hit on the main U.S. allies, Germany, France, Italy, East European countries, and they've all made angry, threatening statements. The new sanctions target the oil and the gas industries of Russia, and the space and nuclear industries of Iran, and they're also intended as major pressure on China to break with People's Korea. Will everyone in the world just fold? There's a lot that's going to be happening in the period ahead, because that's not, I don't think we all realize how this is going to play out. But there is increasing isolation, and just making nuclear threats won't solve it. There have been denunciations from Germany and Austria and France and Italy, from the European Union as a body, from East European countries, and all of them expose this growing isolation. Now, U.S. oil corporations may sell more oil this year, and they're desperate to, because the largest producer of oil and gas now in the world is the U.S., based on fracking. And they got to have markets. Many countries are looking for a way to get past this stranglehold, and there's new economic and trade alliances that are forming. All the analysts see the problem, but the only solution they're capable of is passing a military budget that was higher than the budget that Trump sent to Congress. They added on an extraordinary number of extra things, and it became the largest military budget in human history, $696 billion. And the very Democratic Party politicians who claim to be defending health care and the meager Affordable Care Act silently pushed through this budget that will bankrupt every social program, including health care. A majority of the Democrats voted, along with the Republicans, of course, for this military budget. So I want to address one more thing in sort of winding up, and that is the role of the media, which is to create threats and monsters and absolutely seek to divert all attention. Because look at all the attention was on the Affordable Care Act, and both the sanctions vote and the military budget had hardly a line. Were there any screaming headlines about this? They have to create monsters, they have to create threats. Korea, we're told, is a threat, Syria, ISIS. And since the Trump election, there's one archenemy, Russia. It's described again and again as a superpower, ominous, dangerous. So we need a reality check. Russia is not a superpower. It's not even second-rate. The Russian GDP is smaller than Brazil, smaller than Canada or South Korea. It ranks about 12th or 13th. Now, Russia is a threat to the U.S. because it has nuclear weapons from its Soviet days. It has one aging aircraft carrier, the U.S. 19 aircraft carrier groups that prowl the oceans. It has a base in Syria. Compare that to 800 to 1,000 U.S. bases all around the world. But Russia does have fabulous resources, and that's what they're looking at. 80% of the exports from Russia are gas and oil, valuable raw materials, coal and iron and lead and zinc, along with cereals and precious metals. Now, I think everyone on a world scale understood that the Iraq War was about oil. But we should look at the resources they're eyeing in Russia. There's an insatiable drive to control Russia's great wealth by the largest banks and corporations, and all the currents of U.S. and Western imperialism. They were desperate to have unlimited access. When the Soviet Union was defeated, fell, and a capitalist Russia emerged. A capitalist Russia that wanted to be part of the G7. They were for a time, as NATO expanded and expanded. They themselves were forced to realize the insatiable appetite. Now, these sanctions, they're going to hit hard at Russia, Iranian, and also at Iran, the gas and oil. It's going to stop sales to Europe, East and West. That's what it's intended to do. And force countries to buy from U.S. oil fracking because of markets, even though it's a cost of major dislocation to the European allies. And we should keep in mind that these same countries that are complaining today, Germany and France and so on, We're never against the sanctions on Iraq or Syria. But these sanctions bite them too. And this is the problem, that there's not enough space and room. And so even among the imperialist forces, there's intense competition for the markets. It's a period of great insecurity. So as the U.S. is growing weaker, and just keep in mind again that report, they're going to actually be doing more bullying, more threats, and raising the possibility of new wars. And this is what we need to be prepared for. We need to know also that each of these countries that are targeted are more and more working together, looking for alliances and trade blocs and ways of getting around this enormous monster. Now, how do we as revolutionary workers right here in the center of this dying monster prepare? It's really by having a consistent and global view, or we're going to be tossed all over the map. Because, as even the War College explains, events are moving faster and faster, and crises are coming faster and faster, and things that they can't control and don't foresee, and we don't either. So we need a consistent worldview. We need to know on every issue we're going to side with our class on a global scale, opposing all U.S. wars and coups and interventions and sanctions, standing with the oppressed everywhere. We want to actually combat in the political movement here, supporting one country and then going silent when another is facing attack. And this happens. We want to block with solidarity groups who are focused on one struggle, but there are whole parts of the movement who are allied with the Social Democrats, the Democratic Party, who push a view. Well, they'll support Palestine, but go silent on Syria. Yep. Or they might support hands-off Syria, be silent on a U.S.-supported coup in Egypt, the most populous country in the Arab world. And there are those who oppose sanctions and war on Iraq, but who don't want to defend Iran when it's in the crosshairs. We have to, get beyond this. There were so many excuses for the silence while Libya was being incinerated. And there are those who oppose U.S. war in Afghanistan, but are silent on the efforts to overturn the government in Venezuela. So it's really building connections with all the forces that are involved in resistance and connecting it to resistance here at home. And that's true from Black Lives Matter to the Take 'em Down monument struggle to the immigrant activists. This is something our paper does every single week. Every week, there's that thread always through it. It's the one thing that can help dispel the lies and the distortions. We should also have much more confidence. You know, the major media is losing its grip on the mind of millions, not only around the world, but here too. Now, but back to Korea, which we started out with. Despite nonstop, outrageous level of fear-mongering and demonization, recent poll showed that 60% of the U.S. population, regardless of political affiliation, supports direct negotiations between the U.S. and DPRK. Now, that's kind of interesting, because you wouldn't even suspect that from the media. There are times when we can feel isolated and alone, because we read the media in order to get information, the corporate media, try to figure out what's going on. But we got to, with a grain of salt, know that there are millions of people that are also filtering it out. It's amazing. It does confirm that the media, their media, is not all powerful, and that we have powerful weapons of truth and struggle and resistance in our hands. And that's a new reality of today. I think I got asked enough questions that we'll never get to this work session that's right after this meeting. And that's what folks are working on in the back. But let me, before I get to the questions, let me say something about Monday and the importance of solidarity, because we do want hundreds of thousands and millions in the street. But we have also some immediate requests, and it's what we can do now. So our Korean friends asked us, would we join them in front of the United Nations on Monday at noon for an hour. Now, that won't be a huge demonstration, and it's an hour long. It's at lunchtime. But I think we should bring some signs. Folks want us there because we're the one force that says U.S. hands off, troops out, sign the peace treaty. So we should be there. Now, Monday's interesting for another reason. There's a Palestine demonstration at Union Square. That's at 4:30. And it's like a goodbye message and a salute to Rasmea O'Day, who is facing her sentencing, final hearing, deportation on Thursday. So with Sammy Doon, we are working hard on having this action at Union Square, and that's going to be 4:30 to 6. And every Monday is also People's Monday. Shut it down. Commemorating one of the victims, one of the targets of the racist police. And they take that message to the busiest corners. They go right into food courts and shopping areas and in the streets. And that begins at 7. So there's like immediate things that we should be thinking of doing, and it does build a lot of real solidarity. Now, while we're on solidarity and standing, really with an oppressed country under attack, it was painful that UN Security Council vote of sanctions on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. It was a complete contradiction to every statement that had been made. Particularly China and Russia, just a few weeks before, had issued, for the first time that I can remember it in decades, a joint statement saying that real issues had to be, addressed. The U.S. has got to get out and stop the war games and address the demands of People's Korea. But we have to know what it takes now for the U.S. imperialism to get a vote in the Security Council. What were they threatening? They were saying, if we don't get this vote from the UN Security Council, we're going to take unilateral action. That's how, a few years ago, they got the sanctions vote on Iran. And it was devastating. You would wonder, why would Russia and China, for different reasons. Russia is a capitalist country, that's true. They fear a war right on their border, and so does China. But once things are rolling, where does it go? They may also feel, can they forestall this? Because China has not actually enforced the sanctions. John is correct on that. These sanctions votes have happened before as an effort to forestall like a wild rampage, that there's fear of the people of the world. How will this get out of hand? Because the U.S. has acted without UN Security Council. They got a vote for the war in Iraq. They didn't get it for Yugoslavia. They went right ahead, destroyed and dismembered the country. So these sanctions resolutions can be a way of also trying to forestall, and enormous pressure is put on countries to demand their vote. And then it's trumpeted. We have a unanimous resolution. They're not on the Security Council. They're not on the United Nations Security Council. So we should keep it in mind in terms of not denouncing these countries. It's disappointing, but we don't know what's going on behind the scenes that pushes this vote, and just how heavy the pressure is. There's a UN representative now that every time she opens her mouth, it seems to the right of Trump, right? Now, I wanted to take up Bernie Sanders and the enormous excitement about someone even saying they're for socialism. They want to address any people's issues. The Democratic Party, they really showed they would rather stop him than Trump. That's really what happened. And they were willing to go along with all kinds of disenfranchisement of millions of voters in key states, Ohio and Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, because they thought it would stop Sanders. You can't blame Russia for that.
That's right.
That was their decision. So it's an example. Now, the Social Democrats, they are part of the Democratic Party. That's an imperialist party. You can't get around that. They see their role, actually. They want to be a wing of it. But it's defending U.S. interests. You read their program, they say they're not for revolution. They're for reforms, they're for a better deal. They're not against imperialism. And they are allied with the Socialist Party in Germany and France, who are imperialist parties who carry out, when they're in office, they really carry out imperialist wars. The Social Democrats get an enormous amount of funds. They have foundations, they have staff, they have financed publications. Now, there are times when we might be in an immediate alliance on this issue or that, because we're trying to build all different struggles. But we shouldn't have illusions as to who and what they represent, and why, nevertheless, they can be attractive to people who are just starting out in political life. If it's a talk about Fight for 15 or Affordable Care Act, that's where you first go, and they have the staff to do so. You won't see them in any way defending the oppressed around the world, and instead they do their actual role is to create enormous cynicism. They won't say, they'll say for the record, well, we're not for the U.S. going to war against this or that country. But then there'll be pages showing how really terrible whatever this targeted country is. Yeah, so it really backs up what's already in the media. That's their role. All these publications are to demoralize and make cynical a whole part of the movement that they will always say we're against war, democracy now too. They'll be on all sorts of good progressive social programs here, but give you every reason to call for the overthrow even of Haiti or Venezuela, Sudan. I mean, it could be any country in the world, and there will be what are really U.S. State Department types, dressed up as NGOs. I'm going too long. We even want to pay attention to, there have been recent petitions on Korea, because when there's high anxiety, there was a petition, actually the wording on it isn't bad. It's Code Pink put out, MoveOn.org put out, Green Party has made statements, and so on. Limited, but that's important. Now, we're also constantly in alliances and trying to work with forces who want to focus opposition to the U.S. and keep it focused on that. And that's what the United National Anti-War Coalition is. That is what Hands Off Syria Coalition. Now, they built meetings, put out petitions and statements that thousands and thousands of people have signed around the world, because it was at a time when no one wanted to talk about the U.S. role in Syria. You wouldn't find a word in the movement here. And this helped to turn that around. So we had a real role in that. there's a new coalition, no foreign bases, no U.S. foreign bases, and it's talking about the 1,000 U.S. bases around the world. Shut them down. Now, there are all kinds of groups that are in that, including UNAC and the Peace Council and ourselves, and we've had a role in drafting that statement and in the hands-off Syria and some of these other statements to keep it focused on the U.S. role. Let's pay attention on that. Now, it's only a part of the work that we do, but it is helpful in shaping a lot of the political issues and helping turn the movement as a whole. We can't just, cry about the Social Democrats being stronger and getting funding and whatnot. We've got to figure out what we can do and also who we can ally with, and can we become a left anti-imperialist pole? How can the party, our political influence, in alliance with others, clarify certain issues? So that's an important role. I did want to end with that quote. I think it's important. It's easier to envision, this is true for so many people, it's easier to envision the end of the world and than to envision the end of capitalism. That's where we got to keep our attention focused, because it won't happen by itself. That's true. They face enormous contradictions, but we got to really keep our attention focusing on how we bring it down and how we mobilize people to do that.